What's up everybody, Coach Mills here coming at you with a brand new Overwatch video where we're going to be breaking down Season 24. It's 24? We've been through 24 already? Yep, Season 24 meta tier list breakdown. So make sure you watch this to the end so you know exactly what characters are great and what characters are trash this competitive season so that you can easily climb. But you're going to climb with ease if you go to the GameLeap website. I mean, we have in-depth VOD reviews, advanced tips, and realistically, if you want to see step by step exactly what you need to do in your games to improve and you've been struggling, then the GameLeap website has everything you need. So do yourself a favor and go check it out. But without further ado, let's jump into the video. Now, kicking it right off, of course we got to start with the tanks because the tanks are the most important thing in any given meta. What tanks are good really dictate what everything else is good. So let's kick it off with the tanks and let's talk about the S tier. We have two tanks in Winston and Zarya. We are seeing a lot of bubble dive, a lot of brawly compositions, and both these characters thrive in that environment. Now, I know that it's been a while since you tank players have played Winston, so the big tip that I'm going to give you for Winston is you really need to position yourself close. You don't have to jump into every single engagement. Now, yes, if you get that bubble, that Zarya bubble, and you get that protection from your team and your team goes in, that's going to be great. But a lot of time in ranked play, you traditionally need to start pushing in just by yourself. You're going to be doing damage, creating ult charge, getting space, using your bubble to create space, and then using your jump as a disengage, and then eventually you can execute a full-on engagement when you have that ultimate. But I see far too many low-ranking Winstons just jump into the enemy 5-man team, and there's a Reaper in there, they throw their bubble down, it gets broken instantly, they don't have a bubble or a team bubble or whatever because the Zarya wasted it on whoever, and they just die instantly. And as a Winston, you realistically can never die. I mean, you can play in a way that you die very infrequently, unless of course your whole team is getting wiped. So definitely keep that in mind. Make sure that you are positioning yourself in a way that prioritizes you a way to actually get out of any engagement. Now, talking about Zarya, the important thing that you need to be doing on Zarya first off is make sure that you're talking with your main tank. It is so important that you tell them you're gonna bubble them. You don't want like your Ryan or your Winston to like jump in but use their bubble or fake or not jump in or like engage the high ground or whatever. You want them to be engaging when you're bubbling them, and it's going to be really important for you to converse that. And then of course the big tip on Zarya is just make sure that you are engaging and disengaging based on bubbles. You cannot be pushing forward if you don't have a self bubble, because if you get naded, if anything happens or enemies push up on you, you need to be able to use that bubble to convert into charge, to convert into damage, and to fix your positioning so you don't get caught out. So definitely keep that in mind. That is how you're going to have the most impact on Zarya. Now moving on to the A tier tanks, and these are tanks that are perfectly fine and they're very good in some situations, but they're not quite as dominant as Winston and Zarya. And we have three tanks in the A tier: Ryan, Wrecking Ball, and D.Va. Now Wrecking Ball is fantastic for those of you who can master Wrecking Ball. His only real downside is there's not like an intrinsic combo with Wrecking Ball, but when you're shutting down enemy Widowmakers or just harassing enemy Ryan Zaryas, Wrecking Ball feels unstoppable in the hands of a master. Now D.Va is actually good again. She's actually insane, but remember, the most important thing about D.Va is actually ability management. You should not necessarily be just eating every single bit of spam in the world. You need to be saving your DM for either really important engages, like when your Winston jumps in and you want to protect him from the spam that happens to him while he engages so he can stay in and do more while he's in. You need to be saving your DM to eat really powerful cooldowns like Dynamite and Nade, and of course saving enemies when they get hooked or things like that. So make sure that you always keep a little bit in the tank and don't just waste your DM on every little bit of damage that flies and then have none of it for the important stuff, the stuff that actually brings you solid impact. Now, last up, we got to talk about Ryan, and remember on Ryan that your shield health is actually a far more valuable resource than your life health at every point besides your health being 0, of course. And what I mean by that is when you get to a front line, right? If you have no shield but you're a full HP Ryan, you can't block enemy fire. You can't stop enemy nades. You can't protect your team. But if you go all the way down to like 100 HP, but you get to the front line with a pretty sizable shield, what can you do? You can shield up. Now your DPS can do damage through your shield. Your supports are protected so they can easily heal you up without being in danger. Your team can make plays on the enemy, and you don't have to worry about your health total anymore because everyone can heal you up and they can all do damage. So you got to understand that is really important. And far too many Ryans will use their shield to protect themselves, walk all the way up to the front line, and then their shields will break, and then the enemy honor will nade their team, or one of them will get hooked or whatever the case may be. And sure, you were a full HP Ryan, but did that really matter in the end of the day? No, you didn't utilize your strongest asset, which of course is your shield, and the fact that it's a one-way form of cover where your team can do damage through it, but enemies can't do damage back, which is so powerful. Now, while these 5 tanks are actually pretty close together, there is a pretty big gap between these 5 tanks and the other tanks. So in B tier, I'm putting no one. Yeah, there's a giant gap in B tier. Nothing deserves to be in B tier, and we're jumping straight to C tier with 2 characters, Hog and Sigma. Somehow they made Hog worse than he used to be. I mean, he's actually not terrible because of how the meta is. There's no double shield or anything like that. So even though he's actually worse than he used to be before his buffs, he's actually typically better than he was against double shield. So that makes him okay, but honestly, you're going to be better off playing any of these other characters. Hog is just very difficult to play unless your name is 6. Now, Sigma in particular is another just fine character, but not really that great. And yes, maybe if you're nutty at Sigma, you could get some value out of him, but honestly, if you're that nutty, if you're that good at managing your cooldowns and micromanaging, you would probably have a much better time playing Diva instead of Sigma right now. And then lastly, we gotta talk about the F tier, and this is Orisa. Orisa has a terrible pick rate, terrible win rate. I mean, Orisa's just really bad right now. Please do yourself a favor and don't pick Orisa. I think she is by far the worst tank. So if you're trying to win your games, don't pick Orisa. Now, moving on, up next, we got the DPS, and let's kick it off with the S tier, which contains 5 amazing heroes in Tracer, Ashe, Widow, Sombra, and actually Reaper. Now, all of these characters are good for different reasons, but mainly it comes down to the tanks that are played. When you're seeing stuff like Diva, when you're seeing stuff like Zarya, Monkey, you want characters that can really go in and do damage from multiple sides. They're really brawly, they're really fraggy, they can contribute damage either from far away with their tanks, or they can actually go in with their tanks. So going in with their tanks, you know, characters like Tracer, Sombra, and Reaper, and then dealing damage from further away, someone like Ashe and Widow, which can really contribute from a further safe distance away and still contribute to the engagement of the Monkey or the Wrecking Ball or anything like that. Now, the big Tracer tip that I got for you in this meta in particular is Tracer is actually so good at harassing both Zaryas and Winstons. Specifically against Winston, you don't have to be afraid of Winston at all, especially if you just hit some of your bullets in his head. You can burst down Winstons, you can punish Winstons that run away from too low of health, you can harass Winstons. I mean, Tracer is extremely good at punishing Winstons, and hitting a pulse bomb on a Winston is incredibly easy. Now, specifically against Zarya, Zarya just baiting out her bubbles is good enough. Put some pressure into a Zarya until you bait out her bubble and then just blink away. She wasted her bubble. She wasted her self bubble. And what did we talk about with Zarya? She has to have her self bubble to go in and engage. And if she tries to engage without it, she's going to die to you or someone else on your team. And most of the time, you're just going to completely make her play passive and not allow her to carry. So definitely do that on Tracer. I would highly suggest it in this meta. The next character I'm going to give you tips over is actually Sombra. And Sombra is actually very good in this meta. She is really good. Her EMP is really impactful. She can get a lot of value just with her hacks. But what I would highly suggest is make sure that you're playing the high ground above characters like Zarya and Winston. A Winston is not going to come challenge you up in heaven because you can just go away, and a Zarya can't touch you. So if you play up in the high ground, you're going to be able to find a way to get some hacks off. You can hack a Monkey as he disengages, or he jumps in if he doesn't bubble at the appropriate time. You can of course hack a Zarya or bait out her bubbles from the high ground, and then you're just going to be able to farm things like Diva, characters like Wrecking Ball. These characters are really easy for you to farm as Sombra, so definitely keep that in mind. And of course, when you're playing Sombra with the actual natural counterpart in Reaper, any tank that you hack, if you call it out to your Reaper, he's just going to be able to feast on that baby and just kill that, convert on that hack into a free kill, and then wraith away. And that is why, if I had to give you a suggestion for a DPS duo to run, I would probably suggest Sombra and Reaper and try to coordinate together. Now, moving on to the A tier, these are characters that are by no means bad. They are just not quite as dominant as the Tracer and the Ashe and Widows of the world. And in the A tier, there are 6 characters: Doomfist, Hanzo, Pharah, Soldier, Genji, and Echo. Now, all these characters are good for different reasons. Doomfist is pretty good in certain compositions up against certain characters. Now, he does have a natural counter, unfortunately, in Sombra, so you gotta be really diligent when playing up against the Sombra. But honestly, if you're playing Zarya plus Sombra and Doomfist, that's a pretty good trifecta where you can bubble in your Doomfist, and you can bubble in your Monkey, of course, and then anything that's hacked, Doomfist can feast on it in a similar combo that Sombra and Reaper can have. But sometimes it's, especially on certain maps, where you can really abuse the verticality, like let's say Hanamura second point defense, Doomfist can get tons and tons of value. Now, a lot of people ask, how do you play Hanzo when you have no frontline shield? Because that can be kind of difficult sometimes when you don't have a frontline shield to play behind. But realistically, you're gonna kind of play Hanzo with your supports. A lot of times you're gonna be challenging characters like Tracer, and Monkey jumps in, you're gonna distance yourself from him, you're gonna try to break his shield as quickly as possible so that he has to get zoned away or leave, and you're basically gonna be playing like a McCree normally would, of course, because McCree is trash. So Hanzo is like the next best option where you can contest snipers and things like that, but you're realistically going to be contesting a lot of the characters like Reapers and Tracers and Sombras when they try to harass your supports, and you're going to be playing with them, doing damage from afar and kind of protecting them. And Echo in this meta, there is 3 characters that I would highly suggest you copy in Winston, of course, where Winston can easily get primal. You can get a lot of value that way. Reaper is a great character to counter because Reaper can basically just go and use his lifesteal to have a form of sustain and get his ultimate incredibly quickly. And then last up, if the enemy is playing a Sombra, Echo can copy that Sombra. And if you're playing the high ground, you could basically like all in a tank, fall on him while you're spraying him, and you can get your ultimate by the time you hit the ground, ult the entire team, and win a team fight that way. That will teach you for playing Sombra. Anyways, moving on to the B tier, and just like with the tanks, there's kind of a pretty big drop off, but I'm not gonna separate them by an entire tier. This is still a pretty big drop off between the A tier and the B tier, but this is Torb, McCree, Mei, and Junkrat. Oh, poor McCree. Why do you suck now? Your rate of fire is just really, really bad, if I'm being honest. But these characters, unfortunately, play well when the enemy is playing Rhine or your team is playing Rhine. But they're not that great when your team is playing the Winston or the Wrecking Ball or the Diva or everything like that, and they're not that great up against those either. Now, Junkrat can, of course, get some value on map-specific points like Temple of Anubis defense. Mei, of course, is really good on Hanamura defense if the enemy is specifically playing a Ryan and Zarya composition, because you can wall them off and get some free value. McCree can be okay, but, I mean, there's so many better options. Even Soldier, I mean, Hanzo, Ashe is just way better. Yeah, I would probably pick something else. If you're a McCree main, just pick another hit scanner or Hanzo. And then Torb. Torb is good if you are playing with the shield. It could be alright. Shield v shield, you could break shields. And he's okay up against dive. If you're playing up against dive, you want to be putting a turret that basically doesn't peek the enemy when they're playing main, but when they jump onto your supports, the turret harasses them and puts pressure into them, forces them to relocate a lot sooner. But realistically, Torb is not really the best character to pick right now. Now, unfortunately, all alone right now is Sim. Now, Sim did get some nerfs, and she wasn't really that good in the first place. And in a meta when you have like a Winston and a Zarya and characters like Doomfist or Widowmakers, Sim just doesn't get as much value as she would against Double Shield. And even in Double Shield, she wasn't like the best character in the game by any means. Now, she can still get value, especially in the lower ranks. I think Sim is one of those characters that if you're very good with her, you're mechanically good, you understand how her abilities work, and you're creative, you can find a way to get value in any composition. But she is one of those characters that I would probably reserve for those Sem mains of the world. And honestly, if you're a Sem main, you probably don't even give a single morsel of an F about this tier list. so yeah. Moving on to the F tier. Now, in the F tier, it's none other than Bastion. Now, yes, Bastion might be dominating the lower ranked tiers, but right now is probably the least likely that Bastion will dominate. I mean, Double Shield is not very good right now. It's going to be pretty hard for you to protect your Bastion. You're going to be playing Double Shield, but you're going to have terrible tanks in the meta, of course. And if you don't know still how to counter Bastion, I've made multiple videos on the topic, so please go check those out, or go check them out at the GameLeap website, because we have tons of videos how to counter this. And Bastion's trash, please don't play him. Now, moving on to the last but certainly not least, let's talk about the supports. And in the S tier of supports, we have 3 supports: Ana, Lucio, and Mercy. And yes, finally Lucio back in the S tier with Mercy, and it's a great day. Now, it depends really on the composition what's the best support. Now, with Ana in particular, you could probably play her in any composition. She's like probably the SS tier because she's really good in all the different compositions. But Lucio is probably far better, especially if you're playing like Ryan Zarya. If that's the composition you're going with, you realistically should be having a Lucio to speed your tanks in and out so they could be more effective and do more damage and get you on position quicker and things like that. But probably should be going to either Mercy or some of our air tier picks if you're playing the traditional like Zarya Winston composition, because Mercy basically has that mobility and she gets to be far more in and out of the battle without being as needed to actually have a pocket. So she's far more self-sufficient than some other options. And of course, she's incredibly good when you're pocketing something like, for example, an Ashe. You can get tons of value and you could like split the difference between going in with your tanks and then pocketing your Ashe and back and forth, back and forth. Now, the reason that all three of these are in S tier though, is I do think that you could probably play all three of these in any composition depending on how you play. If you have expertise, like Lucio could be played in traditional dive, he could be played with a Rein Zarya, but it really comes down to how you know how to play Lucio, because you have to change up your play style depending on what your tanks are doing. Like a Lucio that is in a full designated dive, right? You want to really be going in with your team, but if you're playing Rein and Zarya, you really want to be like taxing around, of course, your Rein and your Zarya, and then peeling when you can. So it really changes your play style. That's just something to think about when deciding what character to pick. Now, moving on to the A tier, these are characters that are very good in the meta, but they have to kind of fit the composition. You shouldn't be playing them in every single composition, in Zen and Mura. Now, Zen is very, very good, specifically in that Monkey Zarya composition or Monkey Dive composition that we talked about before, but playing Zen when you have a Rein Zarya and not a Lucio can be pretty bad, if I'm being honest, because that speed boost is like some of the most important thing that you can give your tanks to enable them and make them more impactful. But in all the other compositions, ball compositions, Diva, Monkey compositions, Monkey Zarya compositions, Zen is going to be absolutely fantastic, and it's going to allow your Monkey or your ball or whatever to burst down that target that you discord. Just try to call out your discords. And then Mora is in the A tier because Mora is one of those characters, especially for you low ranked players who don't get any peel. And I know that it's a struggle, and sometimes even if you're playing the best pick like Zen, if you don't get any peel and you're being jumped on by 3 people, it's far better to play the less optimal pick if you stay alive, because I promise you, even if you're playing a bad pick, if you're alive, you're gonna get more value if you're dead, right? So yeah, that's why Mora is in our A tier, but this is more catering towards your specific situation. It should be a character that you're always willing to flex to if you're really getting punished over and over and over again and not getting any help. Now, moving on to the C tier, this is Brig, and Brig is actually not that bad. I mean, Brig can still give you some AoE healing. She can kite away some of these characters like Tracer. Not as good as she could before by any means, but still decently enough. She can go in with her team. You could play her in a composition like, let's say, a highly mobile composition. If you wanted to play her with Dive and maybe you have something like a Mercy Brig, that's perfectly fine, honestly, because Brig can kind of help the team from afar, contribute to the fight, and her rally is still one of the best offensive ults in the game. Brig is still a pretty decent character to play, but honestly, you probably would just have a better time playing something like Lucio, Ana, Zen. I mean, you probably have more fun, first of all, but I don't think Brig is that great unless you're like a diehard Brig main. I probably wouldn't play her, and I would play one of the other characters I listed above, but she is not that bad, realistically. Now, the character in the bottom in F tier is actually Baptiste, and there's something about Baptiste. Basically, Baptiste and Orisa go hand in hand. When Orisa's trash, Baptiste is trash, because Baptiste really enables that really bunker, not moving, taking a lot of damage and staying alive anyways. That's what Baptiste enables. A very linear type of combat where it's tanks v tanks in like a straight like group v group fighting from afar, not like fighting into each other, but fighting from afar. That's what Baptiste really loves, and that's just not the meta right now. So Baptiste is, you know, a powerful character. He has powerful abilities, and I mean, if you can frag, I mean, you can play Bap, whatever. But Bap is just the worst support in the game right now, and if the meta changes, this might not be the case. I don't think he's a bad hero by any means. He's just not fit for this meta. Now, if you want to dominate every meta, the GameLeap website is the best place to master any of the heroes that we listed here. We have in-depth VOD reviews, advanced tips and tricks, positioning, map guides over every single hero in the game. So do yourself a favor and go check it out in the links down below. Thanks so much for coming by, but that's all I got for you today. I'm Coach Mills, and of course, until next time,